Our top story this hour, the UN General Assembly has condemned Russia's annexation move in Ukraine. Out of the 193 members, an overwhelming 143 voted against Russia. 35 countries chose to abstain. India was amongst them, as were Pakistan, Sri Lanka and others. Many experts have called the abstentions a diplomatic card. It means that 35 countries neither want to accept Russia's annexations nor do they want to side with the West in condemning Russia. To some experts' surprise, China also abstained in this vote, a country that has so far sided with Russia in most UN resolutions. Beijing says this vote will not bear any solution to de-escalate the war.
I was not surprised, but I was delighted to see the numbers. We were all holding our breaths as the numbers rolled in, and it's a strong, strong signal to the world and to Russia that they cannot intimidate the world. They thought that they could call for a secret ballot and that somehow a secret ballot would get them more votes, and they were defeated in their efforts to work against transparency.
And moving on to those who voted against condemning Russia, almost all of Kremlin's long-standing allies seem to have accepted the new annexation. Belarus, North Korea, Syria and Nicaragua.
Генассамблее сегодня, однако, представлен политизированный и откровенно провокационный документ, в котором не только игнорируются все эти факты, но и содержится конфронтационный заряд, способный подорвать любые усилия в пользу дипломатического разрешения кризиса вокруг Украины.
In late September, Russia held votes in 4 different regions of Ukraine: Donetsk, Luhansk, parts of Kherson and Zaporizhia. To no one's surprise, the Kremlin said it's all in their favor, soon after which President Vladimir Putin announced an official annexation of these areas. Today's moves at the UN mirror what happened in 2014. Russia took a similar course of referendum, voting and annexed Crimea, a region that sits at the bottom of Ukraine. Since the takeover, till today, Russian forces have held their ground. The region has turned out to be a lifesaver for Moscow. The Crimean Bridge had helped with supplies of arms, ammunition, food and medicines to Russian forces until this month, when it suffered a major blast, disrupting all travel. Back in 2014, the General Assembly had adopted a similar resolution declaring
there was broad support for the resolution reaffirming Ukraine's territorial integrity,
the referendum
unity, and independence,
to be
and declaring
illegal.
invalid the March 16th referendum whereby Crimean citizens voted to join Russia. It also urges direct political dialogue to resolve the crisis.
100 voted in favor, 11 against and 58 formal abstentions. Interestingly, all 5 countries that voted against the resolution today had voted against Crimea. The Crimea vote, rather, 8 years ago. So with this déjà vu, geopolitical experts wonder if the condemnation vote will translate into anything on the ground. All right, my colleagues Susan Tehrani and Siddharth Sibal join us with the latest on that story. Susan, if you could take us through the details of what exactly happened during that vote at the UN General Assembly. Of course, 143 member nations overwhelmingly voting to condemn Russia's annexation. But of course, questions that will be asked is that really going to make any difference on the ground, given that Putin seems so determined to escalate the Ukraine war?
Absolutely. Really, the elephant in the room, as you mentioned, what will deter Vladimir Putin from further escalation? But 143 members condemning, this was really the most votes of condemnation at the United Nations General Assembly, because there had been votes previously since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And this was really the most votes that it had garnered in terms of condemning Moscow's actions in violating Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And while UN General Assembly votes are non-binding, member states hope, and in many cases they have, carried political weight in the international community. And one can't really undermine that sense of the situation, an aspect of it. And that's why Russia really wanted a secret ballot, because it was hoping that perhaps more countries would side with it. But on the ground, militarily, yes, Vladimir Putin is continuing with his war.
All right, Susan, thanks very much for those details. Let's now go across to Siddharth Sibal, who joins us from New Delhi. Siddharth, not for the first time has New Delhi abstained from a vote against Russia, and it is in fact among 35 countries to do so. What are you picking up from your sources here in the MEA? What rationale did India really have for taking this step?
Well, India has taken this stance since the invasion began in February. India has been abstaining every time when an anti-Russia resolution has been put forth at United Nations Security Council or General Assembly. And we saw the explanation vote by the Indian ambassador, Ruchira Kamboj, pointing out dialogue and diplomacy, something that the Indian External Affairs Minister has several times pointed out. The Indian Prime Minister's famous comments now in Samarkand is something that has been talked about by the Western leadership several times. But we have seen a subtle change, in fact, a major change since February. Before February, if you look at Indian statements on the Russia-Ukraine situation, India had several times pointed to the legitimate interests that basically meant what Moscow has been saying, concerns over NATO's expansion. That line has been removed. That line has not been mentioned by New Delhi for a long time now. What India has been mentioning, of course, is that the UN Charter and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries should be protected. And something that cannot be violated. But one major change this time happened in the vote was in the Indian subcontinent. We have seen only 3 countries, Pakistan, India and Sri Lanka, abstaining, while rest of the countries supporting this anti-Russia resolution. That is a message to Moscow that it is not getting much of support. There is a dwindling support for Moscow in the aftermath of the invasion. And for New Delhi, of course, one of the reason of abstaining remains the key energy supplier Russia has become for India at a time when we know that the price of food and fuel have been escalating.
All right, dwindling support for Russia indeed, but is that going to be a deterrent for Putin in any way? A man who seems determined to escalate the war, somebody who's even been issuing nuclear threats. Siddharth Sibal and Susan Tehrani, thanks so much for getting us all those details.